week one against North Carolina. Boogie Huntley gave the speech that feels like it's been heard around town now at this point, and how it got the team fired up after they were down 14-7 against Furman. The Gamecocks have to cause pressure. They have to cause pressure, and that can obviously lead to turnovers. And then I think with the linebacker play too, we hear so much about what Georgia likes to do from a run game standpoint. And of course, former Gamecock offensive coordinator Mike Bobo is the OC for this Georgia team. A lot of pin and pull. They're going to be using their guards. They're going to be using their tackles to come around. They're going to try to create favorable matchups where they're able to get to the outside. So I think, look, you need to be able to slow down that attack from Georgia up front and realize that they are going to want to get it to the outside. They're going to use their perimeter blocking to their advantage. You have to be able to have linebacker play extremely, extremely well this week. I mean, Debo Williams played out of his mind last week. Stone Blanton, the first 2 games of the season, he has been just running all over the field, for crying out loud. I mean, dropping down about 10, 12 pounds. We heard a lot about that going into the season, but you go back to that first game against North Carolina, what he was able to do, it felt like he was playing a QB spy for a lot of that game against the Tar Heels, and he was able to do a decent job with May. Last week, he was flying around. I know from a statistical standpoint, it might not show that way, but he was making a difference last week. And again, like I said, Debo Williams was playing out of his mind. Does Pup Howard, does the true freshman play a little bit more this week? And I think we could see that as well. Moving along, though, with the keys. Number 2, rush for 100 yards. This might be one that surprises people. So last week, South Carolina rushed for 108 yards against Furman. It might not have felt that way, but it was one of those things as the game went on. South Carolina was able to generate chunks here and there. Mario Anderson did a great job when he came in, and he showed a lot of promise as to what he can do at this level. But you need that. I know a lot of people have been frustrated, and it even goes back to the offseason with South Carolina's lack thereof of proving depth in that running back room. I think the thing with Takarion Joyner is, and he mentioned it, he needs to do a better job of just trusting not just his coaching and everything from a training standpoint throughout the week, but he also has to trust the guys around him. Having 2 games under his belt now as a running back, I mean, this is a tough test. You're going up against Georgia, for crying out loud. You would hope that confidence level in him is where it needs to be heading into a game like this. You would hope that the confidence level for a guy like Mario Anderson, who mentioned on Tuesday that maybe from a mental standpoint, he wasn't exactly where he needed to be when he first arrived here, just because he was making that transition from Division II at Newberry. You would hope that a guy like Juju McDowell, with his ability, and he might not necessarily be a guy that is running the ball between the tackles, say, 10 plus times a game, but you would hope South Carolina is able to find a way to incorporate him into the rushing attack. Because with all 3 of those running backs, it's kind of like a pitcher who has the ability to throw some pretty decent breaking balls, but it's not just the curve, right? You have to be able to continue to change up your arsenal. And I think that's what South Carolina's running back room looks like, at least on paper. Can we start to see that a little bit this weekend? 2 games under their belt. We've talked about the offensive line a lot, but I think that rushing attack can look better this week. And despite the fact that you are going up against a very, very good Georgia defense, but it starts with being able to, going back to what we talked about with Takarion Joyner, trusting the training, trusting your eyes, being able to go out there and make some things happen. I know Shane Beamer mentioned this last Thursday at Carolina Calls, which, oh, by the way, can go tonight. Backstreet Grill starts at 6 o'clock. Also air on 107.5 The Game. The thing with DK, and it wasn't just specifically DK that Beamer was mentioning this about, but you have to make guys miss, especially at this level. So while I sit here and say South Carolina rushed for 108 yards, and this is the surprising part that I think some people might not even realize, that was the first time in the last 5 games that South Carolina, or they've only rushed for, second time in their last 5 games that they've rushed for over 100 yards or more. 100 yards or more. That other game was Tennessee last year. Clemson they weren't able to do that. Notre Dame weren't able to do that. North Carolina, week 1, of course, they weren't able to do that. So when you look at those games, and of course the Notre Dame game, South Carolina, they were missing a lot of pieces, right? I mean, shoot, tight end room. I mean, it was empty. But outside of that Clemson game, when you look at just from a win standpoint, right, that Tennessee game, they were able to get the run game going. I think they actually rushed for 153 yards against the Vols that day. So I bring that up just because, look, this is a talented Georgia defense. It goes without saying. They've won the national championship the last 2 years. And as much as we can sit here and say, and I'll get into my third point, which will include Spencer Rattler. Well, we can sit here and say, well, Spencer Rattler needs to air it out. They need to be able to come out, throw the ball, 30, 40 plus times. If you think South Carolina is going to win this game because Rattler is going to drop back 40 plus times without any type of run game, you're out of your freaking mind. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You need to be able to change things up. We've talked about this on this very program. We've talked about it on other GC Live shows. Kind of like a pitcher who only throws fastballs, just like in football, you need to be able to change things up. Because at some point, if you don't, the opposition is going to be able to capitalize because they know what's coming at them. If Georgia knows Rattler is just going to pass and they're not going to even think about running the football at all. Kind of saw that in the North Carolina game 2 weeks ago, especially late in the third quarter into the fourth quarter when the Gamecocks were trailing by 2 scores. If they know what you're doing, it makes their lives a hell of a lot easier. That goes without saying. You don't even have to be a friggin' football expert to know that. I mean, it goes all the way down to youth football, for crying out loud. So it comes down to being able to mix things up. I don't know how long Chris has been there. Chris, I've been just kind of going on a rant looking at some other things. How long have you been there, bud?
A couple minutes. I like it. Long enough to hear the passion. I mean, I feel like you're giving a speech to Gamecock Nation here, man. So I'm here for it. I enjoyed getting to listen a little of that fire and brimstone speech.
Well, as I've told you, I mean, Coach Yuva, he's getting ready for a big week 2 matchup, his 40th year of coaching football. So I was talking to him this afternoon. So that's probably where it came from.
That's awesome. I love it. But I agree with you. I actually talked to Coach Chiswick after the North Carolina game, and he told me early on, we knew we could stop the run. Now it became a matter of just getting after the quarterback. And so as soon as every defensive coordinator you talk to before the game, they're going to tell you, hey, what's the number one goal? Stop the run. Try to make them one-dimensional. And it's even more so the indication here. Like, if you know Spencer Rattler's going to have to drop back and throw the football every single down, makes it easy as hell for the defense. And that's where, your front seven starts really licking their lips.
What has been just the perception of people like yourself from the national standpoint of watching what Rattler has done? I know we've talked about the offensive line just in our conversations off camera, but that aside, just what he has been able to do so far, especially this past game. And, it's an FCS team, but at the end of the day, you're still putting up some pretty impressive numbers, only 2 incompletions.
Yeah, what do you throw, 27, 28 times or something like that, and 2 incompletions?
Yeah, like 25 of 27.
That's great against air, bro. And I don't care what level of opponent you're playing. It's tough to complete 92 or whatever percent that actually is. But, I've been impressed with him. And it was interesting last year. I felt like, especially early on, he was trying to press too much, like live up to this expectation that everybody else had kind of set for him and he had set for himself. But, when everything kind of came together and you let the game come to you, he started to be able to really excel in the last couple of weeks of the season. And I feel like despite all of the pressure that he's been under, despite, not a whole lot of run game helping him out, he has shouldered the entire offensive effort that this team has had through 2 weeks. So I've been really impressed with not only the numbers he's put up, but I think more so the resiliency and the toughness. I mean, some of those shots he took in the first game of the season, I think it would have deterred a lot of other people, but he kept getting up, kept going back to the huddle, kept dropping back and trying to bring his team back in the game despite that looking less and less likely as it went on.
We were just talking about it before you hopped on. I know you got to hear some of it talking about the run game. You've seen Georgia. You've seen this team over the last 2 years. Is it the same Georgia team from the last 2 years? Maybe not, but at the same time, too, you got to respect them. I mean, until someone takes them down, until someone gives them a chance to say that they're not the champ anymore, and it's tough because of the competition that they've played through the first 2 weeks. I say that, though, Chris, because as talented as Rattler is there anything else outside of Rattler just having the game of his life this weekend that it would take in order for South Carolina to do something they haven't been able to do since
Yeah.
2019? That's being able to win in Athens.
I'm glad you mentioned 2019 because I think that's the exact recipe for how you win this year. It's not going to be necessarily by winning it, scoring a bunch of points offensively. And we can say what we want. I'm not sure what Georgia is, to be honest with you. I don't know after 2 games and the opponents they played what they're going to be. I'm a little gun shy about the SEC as a whole because of what we've seen in the first 2 weeks of the season. I think we'll get a better idea of what Georgia is on Saturday against South Carolina. But we know they recruit really, really well. And we know they have guys that are interchangeable. We know the type of players they look for. So if any indication of what their defense looked like last year and the year before, or what these guys are being recruited and developed to look like, then I imagine they're going to be pretty good. And that's even without a deficiency on the offensive line that we expect to see with South Carolina's performance in week 1. But I think you look at it, I mean, what better team out there to pull off an upset with a 2019 script than Shane Beamer's 2023 team? I think you got to score a non-offensive touchdown like you did with Israel Mukwamu's pick 6 in that ball game. You got to be good in special teams, which I thought that South Carolina was back in 2019. And you got to be able to create pressure on the quarterback. Jake Fromm threw a bunch of interceptions in that game because the defense was able to get pressure. Now, they didn't do much of that against Drake May in the opener, but can you find a way? Can Clayton White develop some sort of pass rush that's going to force some interceptions? Carson Beck, you catch him at a great time. Like, who knows what he is? If you're playing him in November, maybe it's a different story. But right now, he hadn't been tested much. You know, the offense has taken some slow starts to get going in the first 2 weeks of the season. I think it's a great opportunity for the defense to set the tone, force some of those turnovers, maybe even score themselves. But, it needs to be a lower scoring game that you force, maybe win the turnover margin by 3 or 4 like that 2019 10 did.
You said that at this point, through the first 2 games of the year, it's still hard to figure out who this Georgia team is. Outside of what we just talked about with Rattler having to do that, what are some of the areas of maybe, I wouldn't say concern, but are questions still about Georgia and that South Carolina perhaps could have some success being able to go up against some of those areas?
It's funny to say because we've always kind of relied on Kirby Smart's teams being able to run the football, but with as much as they've had injuries affect them at the running back spot, we don't know the health of Dejon Edwards. Kendall Milton hadn't looked 100% this season. So who's running the ball for them and how effective are they if it is one of those guys that hadn't had to carry the ball 20 times a game? And then, I look at the fact that Ladd McConkey, I mean, the more that lingers on, and there's evidently the report is that he may not play in this one too, that's a big loss. Now, Mekhi Muse has been great in kind of filling in some of that role in the punt return duties and had a big touchdown reception in game 1. But there's certainly it's a weird situation with where Georgia is, not having played any real competition in the first 2 weeks. Carson Beck still kind of trying to get his feet under him, having all of the injuries impact you at this time of year. I really don't think you have a good feel for exactly who Georgia is. That's not to say they can't go out and win a national championship. I predicted in the preseason they would, but with all of those things right now factored in, I think it's a great time for South Carolina to catch Georgia, and I'm really not sure if they even know what their identity is going to be this year yet.
There's been a lot of people talking about Spencer Rattler, and rightfully so, but Xavier Legette, especially with Juice Wells not being in the lineup, or at least not playing that many snaps so far, he has really come onto the scene, and he's played out of his absolute mind. What's just the talk around the country about that young man and what he's been able to do so far through 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? You can ask the question like, man, where did this guy come from? Or you can ask the question of like, where has this guy been? I mean, he has all the tools to have, showed out this way before the season, but has been mediocre at best throughout his career at South Carolina. To me, and have you know this, you've been around a lot of football players. Like at some point in time, the light switch flips, right? And you realize you're running out of time. And now all of a sudden you're hit with this sense of urgency. I've seen it with my teammates in the past where, maybe they didn't take it as seriously. Maybe they didn't dedicate to their craft. Maybe they had other distractions going on. Maybe it just was slow in terms of being able to grasp everything you're being asked to do. But watching him, the way that he attacks the football, I mean, obviously he's got great athletic ability, but watching him go up and get the football the way that he did in that North Carolina game, three times it seemed like, I'm really impressed with him. And I wonder what this offense will look like when you get Juice Wells back to 100%. Like the focal point of the defense cannot just be on Wells like I think it was at times last year. With Legette, you have to be, concerned about the ability for him to beat you on a deep ball. And certainly I think he'll draw a little bit more one-on-one coverage because of what Wells can do once he's fully healthy.
Yeah, Shane has really been hush-hush on Juice Wells, and I say it to people all the time, especially our listeners. This is the difference with the NFL. You don't have to put an injury report out there. The only thing that we know, and I don't think it's been reported publicly, is, and we've said it on our program, is that he's dealing with a toe injury. And, at some point, how much pain can he play through? And I think that plays a part into it. I bring that up, though, because with this offense, whether Juice is out there, whether Juice isn't out there, and again, it's a small sample size, just like we can say about Georgia and any team through 2 games at this point. What has impressed you the most, though? And it's tough after that first game, but what has impressed you the most so far with what South Carolina is trying to do from an offensive standpoint? Because it wasn't until the Tennessee game last year, it wasn't until the Clemson game last year that they started to really play free. And I know that was something that was said a lot because of former offensive coordinator Marcus Satterfield, and it's easy to throw everything back on him. But there seems like there is a difference with what Dal Loggins is trying to do with this offense.
Yeah, my favorite part of it is going back to what we talked about earlier, that Spencer Rattler, the confidence with which he's playing, the unflappability which he seems to have, despite things maybe not going the way that you like to as a quarterback. It's easy to get frustrated when your offensive line's not blocking for you. But he kept fighting. That perseverance at the end of that North Carolina game was something that really stood out to me. So clearly, he and Dal Loggins, they talked about their connection in the preseason, how much fun Spencer was having in practice. And, I think that's one of the most fascinating dynamics of this game. Like knowing that you're at a deficiency on the offensive line versus, one of the best pass rush groups you'll play all year long. What do you do to compensate for that? I think, Dal Loggins clearly has to get the ball out of Spencer's hand quickly. You talked about hitting a bunch of deep balls. You're not going to have a chance to just drop 5-7 step drops and throw the football down the field. So you got to pick your spots. I think this idea that you're going to, max protect or bring a bunch of guys in, and that just brings more defenders to the party. So let's keep spread out. Let's move the pocket at times and not allow the defensive rush to know where the launch point's going to be. But definitely got to get the run game going too, just so you don't fall into that trap of being one-dimensional and feeling like you're having to throw, especially playing from behind.
Beamer hasn't officially announced who the starting offensive lineman will be this week. And we get I always say I have the 2 deep in front of me. I said, this thing means nothing because last week it was completely different. But I say that because there's a possibility that we see 2 true freshmen on the offensive line that had a chance to get in last week, Luedecke, Babalade, and Trevon Bob. As freshmen, it's one thing to be able to get your first game under your belt at home, like they did last week and against Furman. It's another to go on the road, especially in an environment like that at Georgia next week, contrary to what Kirby Smart is saying and poor Tonka Hemingway catching strays from SEC Media Day. But I bring that up, though, Chris. What do you remember early in your career? It was some of these younger guys going in there. Could have been just another freshman going in there. Could have been your first opportunity playing in your first SEC road game. What is something that these guys are going to have to get prepared for the best they can? What are some of those things you think?
No, I'll speak to, the perspective that I have. 92 was my redshirt freshman year. That class, James Bates, Danny Werfel were in that class that came in 92, the year after I got there. But it also was filled with a couple highly regarded recruits on the offensive line, Jason Odom and Reggie Green. Early in the year, those guys got thrown into the fire. We had to go to Tennessee, I think, in week 2 or week 3 maybe, and they certainly took their lumps in that game. And I don't think of a more difficult position to play than tackle in the SEC on the road in one of those loud venues like that. But those guys kind of held their own and they got better, and it paid dividends as things went on. I always believe that if it's equal, you're better off going with the young guy just because of what that's going to do to help the development of your program. Now I don't know the personalities of these young offensive linemen there in Columbia, but you hope that they're guys that are competitive, that want to come out and fight, that understand that they're going to take some lumps and have to move on from it. But it's certainly, I don't envy anybody having to block some of the edge rushers here in this conference, or even the interior linemen for that matter.
Chris, we've talked about this with former Gamecock players over the last couple of weeks, but can you just speak on the fact of when you are a young player, and some players will redshirt, and Shane Beamer went down the list, I think actually heading into the North Carolina game, like the number of starters for South Carolina, specifically on the offensive side, but he's like Spencer Rattler, Vershawn Lee, went down this list of names. There's this notion, especially now with how recruiting is and how we cover it, obviously at On3, and you have the other recruiting sites. These fans know who these players are. They know 5 stars, 4 stars. They know how fast they run. They want to see some of these younger guys in there. And if they don't see them in there right away, they start to worry. I bring that up just because how much can 2 weeks of in-season practices, how much can that make a difference? And do you think, with this South Carolina team, as you said, we're seeing with the offensive line, would you expect to see more younger players as the course of the season goes on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the expectation, unless for some miracle you're able to get a combination here with some veteran guys that gets things shored up here week 3 or week 4. But it's funny. You go back when I was in school, virtually everybody got redshirted, and very few people knew the ins and outs of these recruits in their lives before getting on campus. I think it was actually a blessing for me walking on originally. Like, nobody really expected a ton from me. I didn't have that pressure that everybody else had kind of put on me. So from that perspective, I think it was a little advantageous. But I can tell you, the only way to get better is to get reps. Just like anything else in life, the more you do it, the better you're going to get. And I can remember getting in there, as a redshirt freshman in '92, and feeling, like, wow, this is crazy. Everything's fast. It's a lot tougher than I imagined. And then, the more you play, the better you feel about it, having a great spring, and then coming back in '93 and you catch that first touchdown. And now all of a sudden, like, man, I could do this. And so part of it is you think but until you actually do it, you probably don't really know. And so getting some success, it's important to have some success for young guys early on to help, get that feeling solidified. Now, going back to what you said, a completely different dynamic. The fans do know, and they do want it. It's almost like the backup quarterback. Everybody's favorite player is the backup quarterback. It's the shiny new toy. And I think now that's spread to everywhere else. The new recruits coming in, they're going to help our program. It's, these guys were hyped up in high school. They're going to come in and deliver. But there's also the thing of, like, we better play him some so he doesn't get in the transfer portal. Like that I can't even imagine that dynamic as a coach, trying to placate kids that you probably promised a lot to when they were coming out of high school that may or may not be ready based upon what you've seen in camp, but you want to keep them around, and you got to find a way to keep the family happy. You got to keep the other handlers, from looking for other opportunities.
Have you talked to coaches about that? Have you talked to coaches across the conference maybe, and just have they kind of relayed that to you, how they've had to kind of change their approach with certain things?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've had to change their approach considerably. I mean, you're constantly re-recruiting your roster every single day. I mean, and
But
I don't think
retention.
yeah, Kirby Smart's done it better than anybody else. I don't know how he's been able to do it as well as he has, but he's talked about the connection that he has. Continuing to build it with their families. I think it's important that you do that. How many families end up getting in their kid to shoot? We saw at Florida, Travis Etienne getting in his brother's ear about, oh man, you should transfer out there to play with Coach Prime. Like, families, everybody's got something they want to say. But I think the thing that most of the coaches are most upset about is the tampering behind the scenes. And I think that's every coach you talk to says there needs to be something to enforce the rules more and eliminate the tampering that's taken on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, I had a conversation with former Clemson quarterback Taj Boyd, who have been able to develop a good relationship over the last couple of years. And he's like, Mike and Chris, this isn't anything that you don't know. Everything that used to happen in the back door, it's just happening in the front now. And the NCAA just doesn't care because they can't police it. Or at least so far, they haven't been able to police it.
Well, they don't want to police it because they're afraid of, some sort of lawsuits. They pick their battles. The North Carolina receiver that's just ridiculous that they're not letting this guy have eligibility with the circumstances around that. They'll pick their battles that they think they can win.
Yep.
Yeah, and they throw their hands up to things that could potentially end in litigation.
Mm-hmm. It goes without saying, but we'll hear you say it. How big would this mean for South Carolina to be able to go get a win? How big would this be for Shane Beamer in year 3?
Yeah, you know what? As I look at it, I'm thinking, man, there's no chance. South Carolina has 0 chance of winning this game. But it's the same feeling I had when Tennessee came to town at the end of the year last year. I thought Tennessee would roll over South Carolina, especially with the Gamecocks coming off that loss here in Gainesville to the Gators where they didn't even score an offensive point. Like, it seems bleak, but for whatever reason, Shane Beamer seems to be at his best when the chips are down like that. And I don't know if there's anybody that I've seen that's been able to rally the troops the way that Coach Beamer has. So maybe there's a message, maybe there's a plan, maybe there's something that they can do to catch Georgia off guard. As I said earlier, I'd rather play this Georgia team now than play them in November, given where we think that their evolution will be by that time. But it seems unlikely, but that Clemson upset last year seemed a lot more unlikely than this one.
I don't want to hold you up all day because I know you got to hit the road, get ready. What game you going to be covering?
I'm in the studio. Weekend? I'm in the studio every week, so
you are okay.
Easy. Yeah, I'm in.
Is that different now?
No, you know what? I've been in the studio. This is my 9th year with the SEC Network. I've done pretty much primarily the studio stuff, but I have, I got to call a couple of those Gamecock games for the openers in the last 2 seasons. This year, the opponent was a little too high class for me to be able to get the call on that one. But, it's easy because I'm in Charlotte. I can drive down to Columbia and knock that out. But, yeah, I'm all studio stuff this year.
Well, you'll have an opportunity to see everything this week. And then, but what I was going to ask you is, and I have to bring it up, and you know how it goes. You're never going to make every fan base happy. But there were some people in this Gamecock fan base that were upset. And I'm trying to remember, I think it was the panic meter. And I think you had the panic meter going through the roof for South Carolina week 1. Again, it's what you saw out there. I mean, the way that we graded the performance, we go back, we watch the tape as if we're coaches, and we try to grade things out, and it wasn't good. Again, it was an FCS team last week, a good FCS team, but strength, size, speed, over time, it did what you would expect South Carolina to do against an FCS team like that. What do you need to see from South Carolina? And I know Gamecock fans aren't going to want to hear moral victories, but what do you want to see from them this weekend to be able to feel better about the direction that they're heading in, at least where they are right now in year 3?
It was interesting after week 1 because the 3 losers in our conference, Florida, South Carolina, LSU, all had games against opponents that were far inferior to them. But I think it was perfect for each of those teams, a chance to not only come back, get some confidence, get some momentum going, but also, try to work to clean up some of the things that undermined your efforts in week 1. So I think there was a lot to be positive about in the Furman game. A little slow start for them, but that was kind of the common theme throughout the SEC last week. Going back to what your question about the panic meter, I was panicked because the offensive line, looking as bad as it did against North Carolina, and no offense to Chiz and Mac Brown, but those defensive fronts are nothing compared to what you're going to play with the best of these teams. And by the way, the best of them is what you got on the schedule this week. So, if you can show me that you've shuffled some things around and you're able to protect better, if you can show me that you are doing some things differently schematically, that'll help shore up the protection. I mean, part of my panic meter is Spencer Rattler can't hang up. You keep taking hits like that, you're going to inevitably get hurt. So, unfortunately, in college football, you can't go to free agency in the season. You can't make a trade. You kind of are stuck with who you have, and you got to find a way to make it work. So I in a league that we've always talked about being primarily about the line of scrimmage, when you're having as poor of effort as you did on the offensive line and the defensive line doing nothing to impact Drake May in that game, that made me very panicked. So let me show me that you can be better on the lines of scrimmage this week against a very good test in the Georgia Bulldogs.
How big of an opportunity is this for Rattler from a draft standpoint?
I mean, it's a huge opportunity for everybody, and I think that's probably what Coach Beamer has been talking to the team about. There's no pressure. Let's go take advantage of this opportunity, man. Go play in a venue that is iconic in college football. Let's shock these guys. And I think you've seen Spencer Rattler, as I said earlier, playing free and not putting the pressure on himself that he did when he first got to Columbia last year. You're able to do it against these guys. It says something, because the first round of the NFL draft the last couple of years have been littered with Georgia defenders. Now, the problem with playing quarterback, and people used to ask me why I didn't play quarterback, like, you have no control. You could take your steps, you could throw it to the right spot, you could throw it with great accuracy, and at the end of the day, if the guy either doesn't get open or doesn't catch the ball, then it shows up as an incompletion on your stat sheet. So, he's going to need some help, not only from the offensive line, but the receivers getting open and making plays. He's going to need help from the running backs to help take some of the pressure off him in the run game, to help pick up some of the rushers that inevitably are going to be sent by Glenn Schumann's defense and Will Muschamp. So it's a great opportunity, but it's going to take the entire team. It's not a Spencer Rattler only thing.
No, that's why you played receiver, and for at least one season until your teammate broke it, you led the SEC in receiving touchdowns.
Hold on now. I had the SEC record for 25 years for a season now. The career record, I'm sorry, for the career I had it. 31 touchdowns was the record until Amari Cooper broke it 25 years later. My partner, Riddell Anthony, did break the season record. But let's be honest, Mike, if you had to hold one, wouldn't you rather have the career than the season record?
Career sounds better to me. I mean,
Exactly.
career sounds better to me. I was going to use a baseball analogy, but all those analogies have an asterisk next to it. I mean, like, everyone knew as a kid, like, how many home runs did Hank Aaron hit in the season? How many, hits in a row did Joe DiMaggio have? Like, everyone knew all these different records, but baseball probably not the best to use right now.
Roger Maris lived here in Gainesville. His son Kevin was my coach, so we knew 61 and 61 very well here in Gainesville.
Well, Chris, appreciate you hopping on. Again, you can catch Chris Doering Saturday. Catch him Saturday. I mean, you can catch him tomorrow, too. I mean, you guys go on early tomorrow, correct?
Yeah, 8 to 11, me and PB on the SEC this morning, and then we'll do the night show. Benjamin Watson, Dari Noka, myself, SEC Now. I think it's either 7 or 9. I'm not sure what time we're on, depending on volleyball and some other fall sports. And then Saturday all day, man, with the triple header, we'll be on intermittently doing your halftime and post-game updates, man.
Awesome. I'm actually hopping on with Dari and Aaron Murray at 4:30, so I'll try to hold. I'll try to do a little home and home here.
Let me say this real quick before I go, man. And behind the scenes, if there's information that I need about what's going on with the Gamecocks, you're the guy that I call, and you're always great in help keeping me up to speed as a national or a more regional guy. We don't have that same sort of pipeline for information a lot. So I value you as a friend. I value you for a guy that can help keep me informed, and you do a great job here on the show, man.
No, I appreciate it, Chris. We'll grab some drinks soon. I mean, we're not too far. Charlotte and Columbia.
Let's do it. I'm waiting on that. I'm waiting on the Bojangles, bro. Let's do both.
Shoot. This is awful radio, but let's see. I just promised the Carolina band who's going to be performing in the Macy's parade, I have to get rid of these things by the end of the year. Okay. They expire at the end of the year. I told the Carolina band I'm going to give their whole band gift cards, and I want to make sure again the title right for the gentleman that he's the band conductor. Just want to make sure I get that right. He messaged me back, and I said, "You let me know what that number is." He said 375 strong. So I'll see what I can do to still have at least a couple left for you, Chris.
Yeah, save me a couple, man. I appreciate it. Tons of them in Charlotte, and I will definitely use those, man. But thanks for having me. And just so everyone knows, man, I am a huge fan of Shane Beamer. I love what he's done for this conference, and certainly love what he's done for the University of South Carolina. So looking forward to much success going forward from him and the team.
Chris, you're the man. Appreciate you hopping on today, buddy.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.
All right. Again, Chris Doering of the SEC Network joining us today to talk about this weekend's matchup as South Carolina gears up to take on Georgia. If anyone has any thoughts on some of the things Chris said, let us know. Shoot us a message, and we will read that. Or if you have a question as well, leave a comment and question down below, whether it be on Facebook, Twitter. Where else is this? Facebook. the shows that it airs on. So do that. If you missed any of Chris's interview too, we're going to cut that portion up, throw it up on the Gamecock Central YouTube page, as well as this entire podcast. And then we're also going to put it up on the podcast platform for Gamecock Central. So we'll have the full show as well as the segment condensed down as well. Going back, because I kind of wanted to make sure that we got to Chris. He was a little bit earlier, and we appreciate that. But it goes without saying with keys of the week. Talked about it the first two. Dominate the turnover margin. Rush for at least 100 yards. Number 3, and it's a broken record, but you got to give Rattler time to make plays. You have to give Rattler time. As we mentioned when Chris was on the show, there has not been any official announcement as to what the starting lineup will be. The 2 deep, it means nothing. It means nothing. Because why would Shane do that? He doesn't have to do that. Doesn't have to do that. But I think that it is likely that we will see either true freshman Luedecke and Babalade or Trevon Baugh. I think we're going to see both those guys out there. I think we will. After what they were able to do and be able to create the momentum for South Carolina's offense last week, I think we'll see that again. I think we'll see it again this weekend. If you need a reminder as to what that lineup was against Furman, once those two checked in, you had Nick Gargiulo at left guard, Vershawn Lee at center, Ja'Kai Moore at right tackle, Babalade was at left tackle, and Baugh was at right guard. So what changed was Ja'Kai went from right guard to right tackle. And as we talked about on the show last week, I was being told that you could either see Nick Gargiulo go out to left tackle or you could see Ja'Kai Moore. It was one of those and/or situations. In this case, it was just Ja'Kai going out to right tackle. Started the game at right guard, but then he got bumped out to right tackle. And the reason being, of course, was to be able to put Baugh out there at right guard. We've heard, even Dow Loggins said it yesterday, they're still trying to figure out what that format is going to be. Who are those 5 guys that they trust the most out there? And I know that there's a portion of this fan base that is frustrated that heading into game 3, they still don't truly know what that is. Because look, you have these 2 freshmen that go out there. This is the first time they've ever played on the road. I mean, this is the first time they've ever had to play on the road, and they have to play the 2-time defending national champs between the hedges. It's not an easy task. It's not making excuses up. It's just the reality of it. And Loggins, he mentioned that yesterday. Didn't exactly say it that way, but his whole point was when you have younger players in there, you're going to have to live with the mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. You have to live with them. You're going to get burned in the fire sometimes when you just throw them right out there. And I think with this South Carolina team, with how talented they are from a young standpoint and the young talent they have, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But their ceiling is so high. Their ceiling's high. So I think this weekend you'll see those 2 out there. I'm not going to be shocked to see Pup Howard getting a little bit more run. I'm not going to be shocked to see some of the younger guys out there. I'm sure some of you guys are asking or wondering, how much of Lenore Sellers do we see this weekend? You know, on paper, and even Loggins mentioned it yesterday, that Doty remains the number 2 quarterback. I could see him getting some more time at wide receiver. And the reason I say that is outside of the fact that they're a little banged up there. You got to figure out what the situation with Juice is. But listening to an interview earlier this week with my colleagues, Spencer Rattler was on with Chris and Wes for GC Live. I think that was on Monday. So if you hadn't had a chance to listen to that, it's the only time you're going to be able to listen to Rattler talk about the Georgia game, as well as look back to last week's game against Furman after watching the tape. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he mentioned just the fact that him and Luke, because of the rapport that they've built and how similar they are in terms of how they see plays develop, when you have Doty out there at wide receiver, and yeah, is he the best wide receiver on the field? No, certainly not. Is he the fastest? Does he have the best hands? No, and he'd be the first one to tell you that. But Luke is so smart, and because he's so athletic, he's able to combine the 2, and he's able to do some special things. Now, obviously, last week against Furman, I think even Rattler pointed out, I think one of the defensive backs pushed one of their teammates in, and Luke was just wide open. But the point being is they're able to see things the same way. And if Luke's seeing something and he gets open, there's a good chance that Rattler is going to know that he's going to be open. He's going to get the ball to him. So when you go up against a Georgia team this weekend, right? I don't want to say that Juice Wells won't be a factor in this game, but I think it would be a little premature to assume that he's going to be able to go out there and play as if he didn't miss a beat. So having said that, if you put Juice to the side just for the sake of this conversation, and you put X out there, and Xavier's been playing out of his mind, well, what's Georgia going to do? What's Will Muschamp and that defense going to do? Well, they're going to try to take X out of the game. That's what Muschamp and that defense will try to do. So South Carolina, you're going to have other wide receivers step up. Marion Brown, I mean, we don't know what his status is going to be on Saturday. Although the last that we were told, and Beamer will hopefully give some type of update tonight during Carolina Calls, on Tuesday he mentioned that Brown did not practice after he was shaken up in the game this past weekend against Furman, but that he would be back at practice on Wednesday. Media, we're not allowed to be at practice during the season. We're able to be at a couple periods during the first couple practices going back to preseason camp, but not in season. So all we have at this point is Beamer's word. That's all you can really, just got to give him his word. Take him at his word. So having said that, what do you get out of Brown? What do you get out of a guy like Eddie Lewis, who we've seen more so on special teams compared to offense? Josh Simon, saw some good things during camp with him catching the ball. Trey Knox, another tight end. We haven't really seen him get involved in the passing game as much as I think some people were hoping to see through the first two games. And some of that may be by design, though, too. Right? I mean, you heard Chris talk about it, that it's easy to say, okay, bring a couple extra tight ends in to help block. But when you do that, from a defensive standpoint, what are they going to do? They can be able to throw another guy in the box to be able to counter that. So do we see South Carolina try to spread their tight ends out a little bit more? Do they feel more confident with the offensive line after last week? No one's saying that the offensive line is perfect by any means. By any means. But after what you saw, I mean, the bar was set so low after week one that being able to find some type of momentum and be able to find just some type of consistency on the O-line last week, it should make you feel a little bit better heading into this weekend against, a very, very good Georgia team. No one's saying that Georgia and Furman are the same by any means. Rod says, if nothing else, they'll be ready to help veterans recharge through their provided depth. I think, look, the beauty about having freshmen go out there competing, obviously they're able to gain experience. And we've talked about this many, many times before. And sometimes in the moment, it might not feel that way. But I keep going back to last year, and I keep bringing up the Vanderbilt game with Stone Blanton. Stone didn't have a great game against Vandy. There were a couple plays he got beat. However, through that and through the other opportunities that he had last year, he was able to learn from it. And that's why Stone, on top of the amount of work that he puts in, the amount of film study and the weight that he dropped down to just be able to get quicker, that's why he's been playing at such a high level these first two games of the year, on top of the fact that he was able to get some first-team reps in spring because of Mo Kaba being hurt at the time before being re-injured week one against North Carolina. So it's being able to get those in-game reps to be able to know, okay, this is what it's like. This is what it's like playing at this level. This is what the speed's like. This is what the crowd is like. All those little things. So as Oluwatosin Babalade, a.k.a. Tree, and Trevon Bogg go to Georgia this weekend, they're going to be experiencing a lot of first. And not only them, but some of the transfers as well. I mean, Nick Gargiulo, we had Nick on Guard at Nights Unplugged on Monday night at CB18. We threw that interview up on the Gamecock Central podcast platform. And if you're a subscriber, you can watch that video in its entirety, all 30 minutes on Gamecock Central. And if you're not a subscriber, you can sign up today for $1. 50% off for the whole year, too, if you want to do that as well. A couple specials we have going on right now. But even Nick admitted, I mean, the biggest game that he played in, of course, Yale-Harvard is very big up there. But it's not going to be compared to anything like what they're going to see this weekend. Especially after Kirby's trying to, get that fan base riled up, give you the little coach speech to be able to find something, some type of bulletin material, and he's trying to challenge his fan base to come on out. Because again, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people, including fans of Georgia, that are going to look at this game as a real test, as a real challenge for the Bulldogs, because they see the spread. 28 points. It's been going up and down around that 28-point mark. Not a lot of people are giving the Gamecocks a shot in this game. Never mind thinking that South Carolina can win. I mean, they don't even think it's going to be close, for crying out loud. So because of that, in a sense, it can help South Carolina. The reason I say that is because that's why you're hearing Kirby trying to encourage his fans to come out. Because he knows that Shane Beamer and this Gamecock team, what they did last year, what they did to Tennessee, what they did, more importantly, on the road to Clemson. And if you, as a fan base, do not come out and don't make it loud, it can help this team. It can help this team pull off the unthinkable by being able to upset the Georgia Bulldogs. Looking at some of the comments here, William says, and Mario Anderson's presser, Anderson said, "You will see more effort from me." I think with Mario, and again, it goes back to what he mentioned from a mental standpoint, he's figuring out what college ball at this level is all about. And that's not to say Mario doesn't work hard. That doesn't mean Mario isn't capable of playing at this level. But when you're used to playing at a level like that, some players will pick it up quicker than others. Carlin Spittel, he was one of those players that came into South Carolina. He was able to pick it up. It took him a while to be a starter. I think it was about the third or fifth game, something like that. And he started like the last 6-7 games of the regular season for South Carolina. And then also the bowl game too. But the point being is, that's an example of a Division II guy that transferred in here, had a lot of success at South Carolina, was with the Steelers, dealt with an injury, but he was able to figure it out here. Mario, with what he showed against Furman, again, small sample size, and against a team who you should have success against, but I mean, if people think he's a D2 running back, he's doing that against an FCS team. Mario can play at this level. The question now becomes, how quickly is he going to be able to get to the point where he needs to? I think he's getting closer. If he's not there yet, I think he's as close as he's been in comparison to where he was, say, maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe even a week ago. Certainly going back to the beginning of preseason camp and going back to spring ball. But a lot of that has to do with the fact of figuring out what this level is all about. I mean, you got to realize, I mean, we talk about this with high school players that come in when they're true freshmen. A lot of these guys are so used to being the guy, the man at their high school. Similar for Mario coming in from Newberry. He's used to being the guy. It's a little different when you go from being the guy, regardless of the level, and now you're the third string running back, essentially. It's not easy for people, and you have to bring it every day at practice. But, and as I've told people before, earlier in the week, it all starts with Mario having good practices. And you can say this about any player, especially some of the newer faces. They have to have good practices. How many times have we heard Shane Beamer talk about that? Not just this season, but in the past as well. So when we have people come out and they ask, why isn't player X playing more? Why isn't this guy getting more touches? Why aren't we seeing him more on offense? It's not always the answer, but again, if you follow the context clues over the last 3 seasons since Shane Beamer has been here, you can start to connect the dots. And a lot of times, what I've noticed, and you can go across the country, it's not like a big secret, but especially here, those newer guys, those younger players, are they having good practices? And it's not just the younger guys, it's the older guys too, but especially those younger guys. Can they earn your trust as a coach? Guy like to carry on Joyner. Yeah, okay. Maybe he's not doing anything crazy in the backfield as a running back, but he does things that make this coaching staff say, okay, we trust him. One, of course, being the fact that he's very good when it comes to pass blocking as a running back, which, as we've talked about on this show before, as Marcus Lattimore has pointed out, you want to stay on the field as a running back, show that you can pass block. Show that you can block. And the other thing, too, is DK protects the football. He protects the ball. You do those two things while you're still trying to figure out your situation at running back. Those are two easy things that running backs, if you can do those are two things that will help you get on the field. It's real easy to stay on the field when you're doing stuff like that. Now, certainly the Gamecocks will need more than just that this weekend, as I pointed out with the keys this week, and you could read the full story on Gamecock Central for our premium members. It's not just about being able to find the hole and hit it. You have to shake off some would-be tacklers this week. You have to be able to create longer runs than just 2-3 yards after contact. After that initial hit, you need to be able to pick up a couple extra. And Beamer mentioned it today, or excuse me, last week, but I'm sure he'll mention it again today when he's asked about the running back situation. They need to be able to create some extra yardage with their running backs. They have to. They just have to. And again, if you're just joining us, we talked about this before, but South Carolina, including last week's game against Furman, when you go back to last season, that was just the second time in their last 5 games that they've been able to rush for 100 yards or more. They rushed for 108 against the Paladins. And a lot of that felt like it came once they got into the second quarter and they were able to make some changes on the offensive line, get the 2 true freshmen O-linemen out there. But that's what it felt like things started to change for him. Hayden RNG says, I hope Juice plays, and I hope he is healthy. But with that being said, I hope we don't try to use him as a decoy. We're going to need that extra wide receiver spot this week. I think, and I know there's been other people out there. Let me see if I can find the other comment, because I think they actually said they're using decoy with the word harbor, even if harbor is a decoy. I know you weren't talking about harbor, but what I'm trying to get at is the whole notion of like decoy at this level. I think maybe for a couple plays you're able to get away with stuff like that, but the reality of it, it's not like you're, if you remember that movie Rebound with Martin Lawrence, who was it? The hammer, the sledgehammer, the big center. He was like 6 foot tall kid, 6'3" kid in like a 12-year-old league going up against a bunch of 5th graders. I mean, you're playing in the SEC. So to Hayden RNG's point, yeah, I mean, it's one thing if Juice is able to go out there and he's able to give you something, but I'm not throwing him in Harbor or whoever. I'm not just going to throw them out there just to be a decoy. It's not going to work at this level. Now, the difference with Harbor up to this point is that he doesn't have as much tape out there in comparison to Juice. So you might be able to get away with some of those younger players, especially a player like Harbor, because he doesn't have as much tape out there yet. But I think what you'll notice is even if you have Harbor out there and you're trying just to create some space by just having him run just the go route, just have him run a 9. At some point, Muschamp, Georgia's defense, Kirby Smart, who obviously plays a role with that defense as well. He's very hands-on. I know it's Muschamp's defense now that he's a defensive coordinator with the Bulldogs, but Kirby's very hands-on with it. They're not going to fall for that. They're not going to fall for that. You might be able to take some shots with those guys. But to go back to your initial question about Juice, if Juice is healthy, great, put him out there. If he's not, don't just throw him out there just to be a body. I just don't think you're going to get the result that you're going for. Blake Kennedy says, got to see Harbor run at some point. I'd love to see it, Blake. I really would. And again, talking about Mario Anderson, how has Harbor looked in practice? Is he performing well? Is he having good practices? That's all part of it, right? And I know some people, and Blake, I'm not saying this specifically about you, but you're going to have some people that will naturally just be like, well, he was a 5-star. What are we doing with our 5-star? Why was he on the field? Is he having good practices? But I think the other thing, too, with not just Harbor and Anderson, but a lot of these younger players or newer guys, is the fact that you have guys now that have had 2 weeks under their belt. We talked about this with Chris Doering. You have guys that have had 2 weeks under their belt with in-season practices now. In-season practices. Being able to get those in-season practices are massive because during camp, yes, things are speeding up a little bit, but you're installing things at a different rate. Spring ball, I mean, it's like Camp Candyland at that point with how the installation goes. But once you're in the season and you're installing stuff, you want to be able, there's a lot going on. How are you processing things? The fact that Mario got out there, the fact that Sellers got out there, the fact that Nicholas Harbor got out there against Furman, it shows me that they had a good week of practice. Obviously, the level of competition plays a role. There's no question about that with what we saw last week. There's no question about that. However, it shows me that the coaches trusted them enough to get out there on the field. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, while it's just a small thing, it is a big thing in my eyes with what Sellers did during that touchdown pass, the first touchdown pass that he had to Russell. He went from left to right. And I've been talking about this going back to the spring, that was one of my concerns with why Sellers might not see the field as much as some fans would like him to see early on in his career, is that he has to continue to get better with reading his progression, something that Luke Doty and a lot of young talented quarterbacks that come out that had the ability in high school where they would just look, okay, first option's out there, and I'm just going to take off. By him going from left to right, and I think actually Rattler brought it up on Monday with Chris and Wes. Again, it's a small sample size. It's just one play. But just seeing that shows some of the growth that Sellers is going through so far. And that is massive. That's massive. With the other guys, it's tough to really know what the growth is with Harbor. I mentioned this during preseason camp, at least with the practices that we were able to see. I wasn't going to put video clips out there and try to make a kid look bad, especially a freshman. But he was struggling to be consistent with catching the football. It's a small sample size the other night, but he ran that route, turned around, kind of like a back corner fade in a sense, back shoulder fade. Beautiful placement from Sellers, but that's not easy. That's not easy just to run up there, to pivot your body, and to be able to catch that ball the way he did. He made it look easy. Seems like it's a hell of a lot easier than it really is. But throw in the fact that you're a true freshman, that whole stadium is holding their breath, waiting to see you come up with that football. Because you are their prized possession. You are the 5-star. You are the one that's supposed to come here and help change Gamecock football. Caught the ball. Gains that confidence. Just like the offensive lineman of Luedecke and Babalade and Trevon Baugh the other night with being able to get in there, put their hands on someone in a real game. They're able to gain that confidence. If you guys have any other questions, comments, fire away. We'll wrap things up in a little bit because as I mentioned, I want to make sure I get the time right. Because if you guys have a chance to tune in, we'd love to have you do that. Where is it? I'll be hopping on SEC Radio, Sirius XM at 4:30 today with Dari Noka and Aaron Murray. Talk about this game on Saturday for the Gamecocks. So I'm going to wrap things up in a little bit, try to get something to eat. Did a fun project this morning with former Gamecock running back Ryan Brewer. Have that out. It's through Steel Hands. So be on the lookout for that. But going through some of the comments here, Alex says, haven't seen many jet sweeps. I think the other thing, too, is because there's been only just two games, we haven't seen as much of this playbook yet. We haven't. And I also think because of the fact that you do have some of those younger guys in there, we talked about this with Garrett Anderson after the game against Furman. And oh, by the way, post-game show this week, and former Gamecock quarterback Michael Scarnecchia will be on, which will be great because I think this is a game where obviously the offensive line needs to play well, but how does Spencer look? And he can be able to break all of that down. So Michael Scarnecchia will be joining us. Hop on the post-game show immediately after the game. I'll be in Athens. Scarnecchia will be back at his house, and then intern Joe will be holding down the fort with the phones. But I think you'll start to see the playbook open up over these next couple weeks. The challenging part, though, is because you have an offensive line that in game one, they weren't able to do anything, really. They weren't able to create any type of push or do any type of protection. That heading into that second game, and that's why you also saw it a little bit in that first game, first couple series, right? There's a lot of short passes, and it probably drove people nuts. Well, the reason why was because the offensive line, they just didn't gain the trust of the coaching staff quite yet. And as we saw as the game went on, you could see why. You needed to be able to get the ball out there much quicker. Last week against Furman, a lot of short passes. One of the reasons being, though, is you have two true freshmen out there. You're not going to do a lot of 5-step drops when you have two true freshmen out there that are playing in their first collegiate football game. The fact they're going up against Georgia, first SEC opponent for those two, as well as some of the new faces on the offensive line, including Nick Gargiulo, but more so talking about the two true freshmen, I would expect a lot of similar things as far as short passes, screens, swing passes. But like we saw with Furman, what happened in the third quarter? Furman started to cheat up, and what did Rattler do? Right over the top. I think you'll see South Carolina take more chances down the field to try to mix things up because this isn't a Furman team where as the game goes on, your strength, your size, your speed is going to be able to wear this team down. This is Georgia. They're faster than you. They're stronger than you. They're bigger than you. I mean, we can make a case that, South Carolina matches up evenly or they're better in some of those categories, but you get the point. That's going to be the narrative heading into this game. It's not Furman. They need to come out there and they need to take their shots. I heard a quote last week from my college coach when they were playing Boston College. And one of the things he mentioned is being able to pull off the upset. Holy Cross wasn't able to pull off the upset of BC, but it made me think about this game. That we don't want to look back and say, I wish we were more aggressive. And I've thought about that quote all week as we head into this Georgia game on Saturday, that with South Carolina, they have to have that same mentality, right? If there's a 4th and 1 opportunity at midfield in the first quarter, do you go for it? I think you do. I think there's certain situations where you have to look at yourself and say, hey, look, do we feel more comfortable and confident about winning this game? Are we more comfortable with kicking the ball and making them go the distance and still being able to win this game, or being able to pick up that 1 yard? That's what this game's going to come down to, is being able to be very aggressive. So Rattler airing it out, as we talked with Chris Doering about it. I think South Carolina will do that. I think they'll mix things up. Rod says, so what, if any, is a weakness that Georgia may have that can be manipulated? Oh, I got you, Rod. So what is the weakness that Georgia may have if it can be manipulated? Well, we heard about it from an offensive standpoint, right? We heard from Chris that Georgia hasn't been able to have the same type of success that historically they're known for from a running standpoint. They haven't been able to run the ball as well as in years past. But their quarterback as well, he's kind of a mystery. He's kind of a mystery man. So I think the big thing is with that, looking at Georgia's offense, I'll talk about Georgia's defense in a second, you have to eliminate their run game. If you can make Georgia, and we've said this about South Carolina too, right? I mean, if South Carolina doesn't have a rushing attack, I don't care if Rattler's back there throwing the ball 40 plus times. They're not going to have success doing that. You're not going to win many games when you have to do that. If South Carolina can stop the run, which, as we know, has not necessarily been something going back to last year they've had a lot of success with. However, and I know people are going to keep saying it's an FCS team, they did a good job of that against Furman. I mean, that was the first time since, I think in their last 19 games that they rushed for less than 100 yards. And one of those games included rushing for nearly 150 yards last season against Clemson. So the Gamecocks were able to do a better job with that. And, obviously Furman fell behind. They had to throw the football. That plays a role with it as well. But I think if you're able to stop Georgia's rushing attack and you force them to throw, even though they have some talented receivers, they have Bowers, who essentially he's kind of like a Gronk, Travis Kelce. He's a tight end. I mean, he's a receiver in a tight end's body, really. That's what I would say would be one of the things South Carolina should do. Now, as far as defensively goes, I think, look, they're a team that is big up front. You need to win your one-on-ones. And I think with Xavier Legette, I mean, he's a true 50-50 receiver. What I mean by that is you throw it up in the air to him, there's a 50-50 chance that he's bringing it down. So I think South Carolina, they're going to have to take their chances down the field like we've talked about, but they're going to have to take their chances even when the coverage is there. I mean, you look at some of the teams in years past. I mean, you look at Mac Jones when he was at Alabama. Alabama had some absolute dogs at wide receiver. They had some absolute dogs. But one of the reasons why Mac was so good during his time with the Tide is because he would throw it up and they would take their shot with 50-50 balls. This is a good Georgia defense, but same time, you have a very good quarterback and you have a very good wide receiver. Arguably one of the best combination right now in the country. One of the best with what we're seeing between Rattler and Xavier Legette. So 50-50 balls, never mind the fact of what role does Juice play this week? Is Juice going to be a difference maker? Is Juice going to play this week, really? I mean, we don't know. It's under wraps right now. Shane Beamer's not really saying too much about that. But that aside, that shouldn't change the fact that you have a dog at wide receiver. Throw it up. Take advantage of those 50-50 opportunities. Give X a chance. Because if you don't give X a chance in those 50-50 balls and you're trying to be cutesy and, we'll do this, it's not there. No. Dal's got to tell Rattler, hey, look, there's going to be opportunities in this game where we're going to have to take shots down the field. And Georgia's going to be there in coverage, one-on-one, but we have to have confidence in our receiver to go up there and make the play. Because like I said, he's a true 50-50 wide receiver, in my opinion. So I think that's what you do. You have to attack them through the year from a defensive standpoint. Williams says Harbor, punt gunner. And he's been on the safeties team as well. I think what you're trying to say is he's been a gunner on the punt team, on the punt rush team. And then he's also been out there when they have their punt safe team as well. Johnny Rambo says, buy or sell. Rattler goes for 300 plus yards, 3 touchdowns. I feel Carolina is going to need a game like that to win. Look, I'm trying to go back to last year's game for South Carolina when they played Georgia. And as bad as that was, Rattler did things in that game that made me say, okay, that's not the Rattler that I expect him to be. And I mentioned this, I think, 2 nights ago on one of the shows. He had an interception that was just so bad. It reminded me of like Brett Favre just rolling out to the right and throwing it cross field and got picked off. After that, I'm not saying Rattler didn't, have any bonehead decisions. I'm sure he would even call it that after that moment, but it just seemed like he was much smarter with the football. A lot of the interceptions after that, at least that I can recall, for the most part, were plays where, wide receivers had hit off their hands and they were intercepted by teams, or just stuff that he seems smarter with the football. So what I'm trying to get at is, when you look at this matchup here, Rattler's been very smart with the football. 300 yards, I can see it happening if the offensive line, of course, gives him some time. But even if it's just, more short passes, 3-step drops, wide receivers are going to have to make plays on the outside. Perimeter blocking is going to be so big. 2 things in this game that are going to be big that I've kind of not really hit on so far. Perimeter blocking by receivers will be massive this weekend, because I think a lot of the yards that South Carolina will get, especially if the run game isn't able to get going, you need some type of an extension from the run game. Short passes, right? Screens, swing passes, all that stuff, right? By doing that, you're going to slow down that pass rush for Georgia a little bit. None of that matters, though, if you're not able to have success in the perimeter blocking. I mentioned this last week. I've mentioned it actually the last 2 weeks. Xavier Legette has done a phenomenal job with his blocking, and it gets overlooked so much just because of what he's doing as a pass catcher. He's doing incredible things on the perimeter from a blocking standpoint. He needs to do that again this weekend. And it's not just him, whether it be Trey Knox, Josh Simon, if Eddie Lewis is out there, if Brown's not able to go. I mean, we can keep going down the list. One thing that I noticed in the North Carolina game, Nicholas Harbor, there was a play where Spencer Rattler rolled out and he took off. Harbor was on the right side. He came cross field and he laid a beautiful block. Nice block to be able to spring Rattler probably another, 4 or 5 yards. Perimeter blocking is going to be massive this weekend. And I think if they're able to do that, the stats, if you want to say they're inflated because of that, have at it. But I think that's where you'll see him pick up the 300 plus yards. Again, take your shots downfield, 50-50 balls towards Xavier Legette. But I think the chunk of his yardage will come from short passes. And a lot of that has to do with the success, or is there success, on the perimeter as far as blocking is concerned. Justin goes, I don't care what the rest of the country says. I have faith we can beat Georgia. I truly believe we can shock the college football world. And Justin, look, this is a team that did it last year twice, right? They did it last year twice. And I think you bring those things up because certainly Kirby Smart and the coaching staff at Georgia, they're going to relay that message to the Bulldogs. But this team, this Gamecock team, despite the fact that there were issues week 1, because they were able to have a game like they did last weekend against Furman, a confidence booster more than anything, they're feeling better about themselves. I'm not saying everything's all sunshine and rainbows, but they're feeling better about themselves. And you're also able to look around, and the majority of the players in that locker room, they were also on this team a year ago. They were on this team when they went to Clemson and they beat the Tigers. They were here when they stunned Tennessee and put up 60-plus points. They know that they're more than capable of doing that. It just comes down to having to play a clean game. It's a clean game. No dumb turnovers. No dumb turnovers. William Jones says, pin Georgia's ears back and take care of the field position. No question. Blake goes, DK's first pass this week. I could see some type of trick play or two used this weekend, right? You think about a game like this where South Carolina is heavy underdogs. And as Chris Doering mentioned, maybe some type of big play on special teams. But with DK, that's the beauty with having him as a running back. You can do a pitch, you can hand it off to him, whatever the case may be. He has the ability to throw the football. So the challenging thing is you had week 1 against North Carolina where you don't want to show everything week 1. But I think more than anything, it was South Carolina was just trying to run plays to give themselves a chance to win. And their offensive line, and it wasn't even just the offensive line, just blocking as a whole, they had their issues. So it really didn't matter what you wanted to do that game. Furman, you're not going to show a trick play really in that game, or at least something that you feel like you want to use in conference play. This could be the week, Blake. This could be the week. And if it's not DK, though, I think we will see some type of trick play out there this weekend by the Gamecocks. It is RNG says, honestly, I don't think trying a few run packages with Sellers wouldn't be a bad idea this week. 3rd and short or from the goal line. Heck, even 2nd and 5 or 6. He just runs hard and is really elusive. I think we'll see Sellers. We could see Sellers in those packages. The question now becomes, though, he's got 3 more games to go in the regular season that he can use without burning a year of eligibility. And as I've mentioned before on this program, and I've mentioned on Tuesday night, as a coaching staff, you have to decide what is in the best interest of not just that individual, but what's in the best interest of the program. How many plays is he getting used in? Now, I feel like this is a good week to use him. Now you get a better barometer as to would it make sense to burn that redshirt year or not. Furman, to me, again, more of a confidence booster than anything else, and he certainly got the confidence that I hope the coaching staff was looking for him to be able to pick up. 4 for 4, 80-plus yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, and, of course, the touchdown pass heard around Columbia for crying out loud. It was a 50-yard touchdown strike, but he threw it 60 yards in the air to Russell in the back of the end zone. It was beautiful, and as I mentioned, went left to right. Went through his progressions, despite maybe Dal Loggins saying, run, and he decided to throw it. But I think I think we'll see we'll have a better idea of what they'll do with Sellers, but we'll start to see it this weekend. If you don't see Sellers used that much, I don't want to go as far to say that, Sellers will probably redshirt this year. I still think it's really premature to do that only 3 games in. However, if we do see him this weekend, and depending on the number of plays that he gets, if he gets, say, 2 plays in, right? Or he gets 3 plays in, is that worth it moving forward? The challenging part of all of this is you have a talented quarterback in Spencer Rattler. So how many times do you really want to take him off the field? We can sit here and be like, well, yeah, I know that, but I'm talking about those short yardage situations, 3rd and 1, 4th and inches. But how many of those times actually occur in a game? They happen a couple times, but is it enough to justify using a guy just for that? You know what I'm talking about? Is it worth taking Rattler off the field and putting Sellers in there for a situation where it's 3rd and 4? It might. I just think the challenging part is with the way Rattler is playing right now, it's very difficult to justify taking him off the field really at all, but especially in those situations. So, again, I think we'll have a better idea after this game as to what the plan is with Sellers moving forward, but I don't think we'll truly know until probably after that, midway point of the year. Question here. I think we have to take chances in this game and hope they go our way. Yep. And you add to that, Georgia is 80-something in defensive pressure through 2 games. Look, The pressure part, I think you'll see Georgia put a lot of pressure on South Carolina this weekend, or attempt to do that, I should say. One thing that I noticed last year that Muschamp did, and the schemes were different too, because South Carolina, they did a lot of zone blocking, and we heard even going back to the first year under Marcus Satterfield, how much they struggled with zone blocking. And one thing that Muschamp did last year as a defensive coordinator, he had the defensive line shift. They shifted right as the cadence was going on. So I bring that up just because there were things that South Carolina were struggling against last year that I think they'll be more prepared for. At the end of the day, it's talent versus talent. I mean, that's what it comes down to. But because they were struggling a lot as a offensive line a year ago, the fact that Muschamp knew what was going to throw them off, and then he also knows the strengths and weaknesses of a lot of those guys. I mean, you don't have the same amount of players on the O-line. I mean, Vershawn Lee, Ja'Kai Moore, those are guys that Muschamp recruited. But for the most part, that offensive line last year, totally different from the one that we have this year with the Gamecocks. Steel Curtain, good to have you on. It says, put them in bad field position and force them to go all the way down the field. Field position will matter. I think you were talking about the comment I made a little while ago about, if it's 4th and 1, right, at midfield, or, a situation like that early in the game. I hear you, but at the same time, too, you got to take your opportunities while you can. And I think South Carolina will be aggressive this weekend. And I just used 4th and 1 from the 50 early in the game for an example, but it can be anything. William also adds, Rattler said, if you're open, expect the football. Cocky Joe says, I rewatched the Furman game. The freshmen actually looked better than the older guys on the O-line. Nick Argiulo has been playing really, really good football. Really good football. I think the challenging part when you have the type of week you had as a team, week 1, it's difficult to really look at anyone on the O-line and say, wow, they played great. It's not to saying like Argiulo was flawless week 1, but even Dal Loggins hinted at it with the fact of, I think he said Vershawn and Nick they never stopped fighting. Like they didn't have that quit in them week 1. But Nick, I think, is going to be a player that this team is going to need to continue to get better as the year goes on. But I feel like he's fitting in right away. I mean, everyone wants to say, oh, he's an Ivy Leaguer. Leading tackler in the NFL the past 2 years. He went to Yale. I think he played with Nick 1 year or 2. Could be wrong about that one. Steel Curtain says all the skill players need to step up on Saturday and going forward because they're going to try to double team Xavier Legette, XL. They're certainly going to be ready for X. And like I said before, if you see Georgia just putting one man on X, you're going to have to take your chances. Throw some 50-50 balls up his way. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to let it rip. Rod says, App State, Duke, Navy. And yes, I said Navy. Have proven that even against all odds, a far superior team can be defeated. Also, historically, the Gamecocks tend to play their best as an underdogs. Go Gamecocks. We'll see how it goes down, Rod. And Rod also says, catch Georgia looking ahead like the 2010 Gamecocks teams caught Bama. Tommy says, I'd love to see him on the edge for crucial stops. I don't know exactly who that was. Referring to Harbor, you say, because I'm scrolling down, finding you. And Tommy adds, do you think Harbor would be a factor on defense on crucial plays? The challenging part about that is, at least based on what we know, he wants to play offense. He wants to play offense. And I don't want to sit here and say anyone's a diva or anything like that, but he wants to play offense. That's one of the reasons why he came to South Carolina. He wants to play offense. Now, I think he could make a big impact on defense as an edge. And I think he'd be an absolute stud, but I'm not holding my breath that he's going to play defense, at least anytime soon. Marion R26 says, I know they are thinking. I know what you're trying to say now. I know they are thinking Spencer Rattler is leaving, but does he leave early for the draft as well? The only thing I could see with Rattler would be that he decides to opt out for a bowl game, but we have so many more months to go until we get to that point. And that's not even to say that he will, because depending on how this season goes, he might decide that he wants to play in that bowl game. But again, South Carolina has to get to a bowl game first, and then we'll worry about all of that. Johnny says, I wonder how much of the playbook has been hidden so far, and if they'll start to open things up against Georgia. As many years in the NFL as Loggins has under his belt, he's had to pick up something sneaky against a good defense. I'm sure he has, and like I said, I would not be shocked to see two things. One, the playbook start to open up a little bit more this weekend, but number two, to see some trick plays used as well. Cocky Joe says, Nick Gargiulo is a dog for sure. He is a dog. And again, if you hadn't had an opportunity to listen to the interview that I did with Nick on Monday, if you're a Gamecock Central subscriber, you can watch that video in its entirety on GC. If you're not a subscriber, sign up for $1. Sign up for $1. Your first month is $1. Why not? Sign up today. It's also on the Gamecock Central podcast platform. 30 minutes of Nick Gargiulo. Some good stuff in there talking about the offensive line. You can get to know him better as well. Thomas T says, do you think they'll use Harbor on defense at all? Again, I'm not holding my breath. He wants to play offense. Cocky Joe says, any updates on Daniel Hill's recruitment? Everyone seems quiet on it. I think the last that we were told of it, going back to last month, getting ready for his commitment before he pushed it back, was everyone just trying to get on the same page. And that was the big thing. I mean, as we've kind of said before on Gamecock Central, there's been some miscommunication between him and his family in terms of just getting everyone on the same page. I mean, Daniel loves South Carolina. He loves South Carolina. You talk to people that are close to the program. You talk to other prospects about it. He loves what Shane Beamer is doing here. He loves the Gamecocks. He loves everything that's going on. At the end of the day, though, does he become a Gamecock? And I think that's the big question that, unfortunately, we don't have the answers for quite yet. Marion R26 again says, I think we have to play more talented freshman linemen and take the bumps and bruises along the way. I think you'll see that again this weekend. Like I said, this too deep means nothing. It means nothing, folks. I think we will see Luedecke and Babalade out there again. I also think we will see Trevon Baugh back out there as well, just because of the spark they gave you. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? That's when the things started to really pick up from an offensive standpoint after you threw those two guys in there. So it goes back to one of the things I was talking about before with Nicholas Harbor and Mario Anderson. Have they had good practices this week? Have they had good practices this week? That's what it goes back to. Jeremy, how is Landon Sampson progressing? It's just about being able to stack good days on top of good days, Jeremy. I mean, that's the latest I was really told as far as Landon is concerned. You know, obviously a lot of hype about the young man coming out of high school, and I still think he can have a lot of success at USC. But I think, again, it's just trying to continue to stack good days on top of good days. Famously Garnet Sports, good to have you on. Says, wonder which Mike Bobo OC shows up on Saturday. It's a great question. It's a great question. And I think, again, like we were talking about with Chris Doering earlier in the show, is Georgia going to be able to have success running the football? Because if I'm Mike Bobo, if I'm Kirby Smart, what I'm saying to myself is I want to run the football until South Carolina can prove they can stop it. That's how I'm thinking. And even though the Bulldogs might not have had that type of success through the first two games, as Chris mentioned, you would think, based on the history that Bobo has with South Carolina, he would love to beat the Gamecocks in an old school smash mouth style, and that's being able to run the football. So that's why if I'm South Carolina, my biggest thing is, yes, Bowers is out there. Yes, Beck is at quarterback, which we still don't know too much about. I'm doing everything I can to stop the run this week. Because if we can stop the run, Georgia's going to have to throw the football. And while they do have talented guys out there on the perimeter, and obviously at tight end as well, if you're able to do that, you make this team one-dimensional. And I think Georgia just won't be as successful as they could be. I mean, like I said with South Carolina, you can't just assume Rattler is going to be able to go back, throw the ball 40-plus times if they're not able to get a run game going, and they're going to be able to win. There's always outliers, but I just don't see that being the case this week. Rod says, shout out to Old Faithful, our specialties. Our special teams is, I think, what you meant. Special teams and our coach. Look, South Carolina's special teams, and I graded it last week. I didn't think it was one of their better performances. And the reason I say that is because of how well they have been over the last 2 years. They've set the bar so high. So it's kind of like when you're on that grading scale, it's curved a little bit. They have to be cleaner, right? Some of the high snaps on the PAT last week, the block in the back on a big punt return, just uncharacteristic like mistakes. The only other time that I've seen that really from South Carolina was in the Gator Bowl last year against Notre Dame, where they made a lot of mistakes on special teams. USC special teams, as I've said many times before, and we've said this before, even going back to last year, when they are on their game, no one in the country can come close to them. No one in the country. You will certainly need to have some special teams magic this weekend, but you cannot hurt yourself on special teams like they did a little bit this past week. Unfortunately, they were able to still get the win. Cocky Joe says, appreciate all the shows you are involved in, Mike. Very informative. Thank you, Cocky Joe. Probably get some water in me. Starting to lose my voice here a little bit. Caleb Thomas Fishing says, who is the blame for the lack of physicality on the defensive line over the last couple of years? We have not played SEC ball up front. Well, I think it's real easy just to, and I'm not saying this is what you're looking for, Caleb, and I'm not saying this is how you feel, but I think that's the problem, that I think a lot of people just want to have a scapegoat to point to and be like, okay, who the person? Who to blame? If Jimmy Lindsay was still here, I promise you he'd be the person that everyone would start blaming. I think some people have started to point the finger at Clayton White, but I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that, and you've seen it from a recruiting standpoint, we've talked about this with the offensive line, South Carolina is doing a better job of bringing in the size that you need to be able to play in the trenches in the SEC. And that's no disrespect to the players that are here and the players that have been here. We've seen Zach Pickens come through, and Zach Pickens, well, he got drafted pretty high this past year in the NFL draft, and he's getting ready now to hopefully have a great rookie season with the Chicago Bears. Tonka Hemingway, we'd like to see a little bit more from him from a statistical standpoint. But as I've mentioned before, and you can say this about Boogie Huntley too, and that could be the case this weekend against Georgia because they do a lot of the pin and pull, sometimes your stats aren't going to show up. Sometimes you're going to be more of a traffic cone. And what I mean by that is you have to just be out there. That doesn't mean you're just standing still, but you're the traffic cone. You're not going to get noticed. You're not going to be the one that finishes with the tackles, the TFLs, the forced fumbles, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you have to be the one that takes on the block. Sometimes a double team as well. With this offense this week, especially if Georgia wants to run the football, there's going to be a lot of that up front. There's going to be guys that have to make plays. There's no question about that. But that's why I keep going back and pointing to the linebacker play this week. Guys like Debo Williams, guys like Stone Bland, guys like Pup Howard. They need to play extremely well this weekend. Extremely well. And I don't want to get too technical here talking about plus ones and this and that and having an extra guy over, depending on the formation from Georgia, if they're strong to the right side and being able to get ready for all that stuff with the pin and pull. But you have to be physical this weekend. You need to make sure that if you're on that second level as a linebacker, it can't get by you. it can. But I think, look, USC has started to address that over the last couple of years, especially since Shane Beamer has got here with the recruits they've got. They've got some talented guys. Xavier McLeod obviously is here. You look at the guys they have at edge. Desmond Umeozulu. They're bringing in some talented guys here. It's just not going to happen overnight. And the amazing part is when you look back over the last, I'd say really 6 years, could go 7 or more. I mean, I've been covering the team since 2016, but it even goes back to, at least for me covering the team, Taylor Stallworth. I mean, South Carolina has produced some talented defensive linemen over the last couple of years. Javon Kinlaw. I mean, again, you could just keep going down the list. Kobe Smith. These are guys that are playing in the NFL or have had opportunities to play in the NFL over the last couple of years. So I think the challenging part about it all is, why are they able to produce the talent, individual talent, but why aren't they able to kind of be all on the same page and sync here? It's a great question. It's a great question. Now, will South Carolina be able to produce the same amount of talent from this defensive line core? Not including the freshmen, but in the next couple of years, we'll have to wait and see. But I think you will continue to see more talent come in on the defensive line. That doesn't help you necessarily right now. You have to be just physical. You have to make sure, like everything you're saying, Caleb, you have to do a better job of not allowing them to get to that second level. But like I said, this weekend, linebacker play will be massive. It will be huge. They have to have a great game. Thomas T says, what is your opinion on the new entrants? That choo-choo needs something, in my opinion. All right, here's my opinion on it. I don't hate the idea. I don't hate it. And I know there's a lot of tradition, so there's going to be a lot of people that don't give two rats you-know-what about what my opinion is going to be as someone that's been only down here for 8 years and I was a dumb Yankee, all that kind of stuff. I get that. But I don't hate it. I just felt like it didn't go in sync with the 2001 Space Odyssey entrance, right? Like when Cocky would come out from the curtains and that would drop, like, it was building up and everything. Like, that was different. That led you right into it. So I don't hate it, because it plays off the fact that you got the cockabooses behind the end zone and how neat that is for a lot of people that aren't from the area. They always point towards that. You see it when you have a big game. They'll have the cameras outside panning on it. So that's something that South Carolina takes pride in, having those and being associated with those. But it just, to me, it didn't match up. Didn't match up the way that I thought it would. But we'll see. We'll see if it grows on me. I'm sure a lot of people are feeling the same way. Patrick goes, will we see Anderson and Braswell at running back this week? I think we'll see Anderson for sure. Braswell, I'm not sure yet. And the reason why, with a lot of the things I've talked about with these younger players, we talked about it with Chris Doering of SEC Network a little bit earlier, I think the challenging part for some of these freshmen, you just don't know how quick they're picking things up in practice. And it's not just that, but the guys that are in front of them. It's so easy just to be like, all right, well, Takarian Joyner's not rushing for even 50 or 60 or 70 rushing yards. He's playing like crap. Or Mario Anderson's not doing that. It's not as simple as that. Like I said, DK has been doing a lot of good things from a pass blocking standpoint. Gave Rattler some time this past weekend for sure. Gave Rattler some time even in that UNC game. I missed some too. But I think what we'll see with Mario is we'll start to see Mario play a little bit more. I think we'll see Mario start to play a little bit more, especially after hearing what he said this past week during the press conference, which was, from a mental standpoint, started coming along. Holy cow, we're almost at 2 hours because I'm just trying to answer all the questions here. So much for an hour show. Alan goes, Nick's leadership and maturity will help that freshman gain confidence. No question about it. Benjamin says, as a group, USC hasn't been big enough on the D-line. They're getting bigger, but that's been one of the challenges. And same thing can be said about the O-line as well, which is why they have focused a lot on the trenches over the last, I'd say really the last 2 years, but even going back to when Beamer first got here and laying down the foundation for it and just planting those seeds for some of those younger players who either last year or now are guys that they're trying to go after to land. Steel Curtain says, do you think the defense will use more than 3 linebackers since Georgia is a run-heavy team? I think it all comes down to the personnel. And I know that's a really lazy answer for me to say, but like Chris was mentioning, Georgia has struggled with running. I think you'll see them come out there trying to run the ball a lot early. And if they're not able to have that success, or if South Carolina is able to have success, then they're going to go back out and they're going to try to spread things out a little bit more. So I'm not going to be shocked to see South Carolina use 3 linebackers, but how much of that stays that way is indicative of how Georgia, if they're able to have that type of success in the run game or not. God Gloves Comics, good to have you on. Yeah, it seems like a long while since we had Travian Robertson, Kelsey Quarles, Curlis, excuse me, or certainly a Melvin Ingram on the D-line. Zach Pickens was okay, but only showed up occasionally. OxZGen says, we have to stop the run. We play in the SEC. This is a run-heavy conference. We looked bad in our first 2 games. Shaking my head. Looked better in the second game. Like I said, they held them to, I think it was 80-something rushing yards. It just didn't feel that way at times. But they did a much better job of stopping the run. They just have to do a better job of continuing to disrupt getting to the quarterback. That's one of the reasons why I just didn't feel that way. Action Jackson says, sorry, Mike, just got on. So hope you didn't answer this, but do you think Nick could be a mismatch this week? Nicholas Harbor, that is. I think it all goes back to, did Nick have a good practice? I know people are probably sick and tired of me talking about practice like I'm Allen Iverson over here, or the anti-Allen Iverson by saying it the other way around, but did he have a good week of practice? And I feel like when you talk about those younger players, as frustrated as some fans were maybe in game 1 or even some with game 2, we started to see more of those true freshmen get into the Furman game. How much of that had to do with the fact that South Carolina was playing with a big lead and you're going up against an FCS opponent, and how much of that had to do with the fact that they had a good week of practice and they're starting to gain the trust of the coaching staff? I don't think that it's just exclusive to one of those answers. I think both of those things play a big role with it. And I think for the Gamecocks, with a lot of these younger guys, I think you'll start to notice them play more, even if the Gamecocks are able to have success. Let's say they do the unthinkable and they pull off the upset this week against Georgia. That doesn't mean that a Nicholas Harbor, if he doesn't play, hypothetically speaking, just for the sake of conversation, if he doesn't play that much this weekend, or some of these other freshmen don't play that much this weekend, that doesn't mean, oh man, we won't see him week 4, week 5, week 6. No. These guys are still trying to figure it out. It's a process. It takes time. Some of these guys, yes, they're going to be thrown out there a little bit quicker than others for one reason or another. Jalen Kilgore, as Clayton White mentioned the other day, because of the training that he did in high school, because of his size, he was able to be more prepared for the level of intensity and strength and everything you needed as a freshman in comparison to some other freshmen right away. He mentioned that about Kilgore, and he mentioned that with Pup Howard. Those guys physically have bodies to be able to play in the SEC right away. So some of those guys, yes, those are the case for some. And we know with Nicholas Harbor, he's got the size, no question about that. He's got the speed. But there's other things that play a role with it as well. And with the offensive line, of course, as we know, we got some talented freshmen up there. But at the same time, too, they're really banged up right now. They're trying to figure out what the heck they can do to be able to give some time. Oxygen says, I agree, but that was against Furman, not an SEC opponent, as far as stopping the run game. I agree with you. And that's the challenging part, kind of like with this Georgia team, as Chris was saying about a little bit earlier when he hopped on. Georgia's a talented team, but how talented are they in comparison to the Georgia teams of last year and 2 years before that when they won their back-to-back national titles because of the opponents that they've played through the first 2 games. Last week, they played Ball State. They won 45-3. Week before that, they played powerhouse UT Martin. They defeated 48-7. So how much do we truly know about Georgia is another part of this, right? But I say that, though, about South Carolina having success and getting better as the game went on last week, just because that's all we've been able to see outside of the North Carolina game. And Gargiulo spoke about it, again, in that interview, if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, specifically talking about the offensive line, but I think it's a good representation of the entire team as a whole. There were certain areas where there were blind spots, and they weren't able to see some of those weaknesses, or they didn't think they were as bad as maybe they were, and they found out, and they got exposed a little bit in that North Carolina game. They were able to correct some of those things against Furman, but to your point, and I do agree, and this is the bigger question, how much of it had to do with the competition you were playing with last week versus how much of it had to do with the fact that South Carolina did make some of those corrections? I think it's a combination of the two. I think it's somewhere in between there. The tough part about that is playing one of the best teams in the country this week. They playing the number 1 team in the country. But like I mentioned, George is also trying to figure out a lot of questions. Man, you guys are firing away with your questions. This might be a 2-hour show. God Loves Comics says he's a mismatch for anyone, anywhere, but is he ready yet? Yep. That's the big thing. That's the big thing with Harbor. And I think that's the challenging part. I'm actually going to pull up Gainey's point. We've got a 5-star guy with Olympic speed. We have to get the ball in his hands. We at least have to try. It's so much easier said than done, Gainey. And the reason why I say that is, again, earlier in camp when we were there, and I wasn't going to film this and put this out there, make an 18-year-old kid look bad, true freshman. He was struggling to catch the football consistently. He got banged up in camp towards the end and had to miss about a week of practice, if I remember correctly. So that put him behind the 8 ball a little bit. He's getting caught up to speed. I think South Carolina will find ways to continue to get him incorporated into the offense. But the question now becomes, is he able to continue to stack good days after good days on top of each other in practice and gain that confidence from the coaching staff? And if he's able to, as well as the other younger players out there, or even the transfers, including Mario Anderson, if they're able to do that, then yes, I expect them to see him out there. Skull says Spencer Rattler is a QB who can keep USC in the game if he can get some time. Do you think he gets the time? UGA's pass rush has not been great. It hasn't been the UGA pass rush of old, or at least what we're used to over the last couple of years. But again, I expect them to come heavy this weekend because they've seen the tape. They've seen the tape against North Carolina. They know that South Carolina will likely have 1, if not 2, true freshmen on the offensive line this weekend. You got to get creative. I think you're going to see a lot of quick passes to help some of those young offensive linemen out. But I also think, too, you'll see South Carolina take some shots, especially if Xavier Legette is in one-on-one coverage. Throw it up. Give him a 50-50 ball. Give him a 50-50 ball. Famously Garnet Sports says, hypothetically, let's say the O-line shuts down Georgia's D-line. What does that say about Kitchens and what he gave North Carolina? I think it plays a role, but I don't know how much of it truly makes that much of an impact. And the reason I say that is we see it in the SEC so much, right? I mean, it just happened to be an ACC opponent week 1. But we've seen so many times where coaches will go from school to school, right? I mean, Will Muschamp, for crying out loud, right? Will Muschamp, Mike Bobo, they're both on Georgia's staff. Muschamp has been there since he got fired at South Carolina 3 years ago. Bobo was at Auburn for a year. He was an analyst last year for Georgia, and now he's the offensive coordinator now. But I say that because there's a lot of these coaches who either recruited these players. Like, there's so many crossovers, but I think it plays a part. I think it plays a part, but I also think going back to what Nick Gargiulo said the other night, I think there were a lot of areas, these blind spots that South Carolina had that they didn't think were as bad as it was. And hopefully they've been able to correct even more of it after this Furman game. But like I said before, how much of it had to do with the fact that it was Furman and how much of it had to do with the fact of being able to correct some of those things in practice through coaching. Action Jackson says, I think Eamon Worry might be one of the best matchups for Bowers in the country. And hopefully Nick will be back out there this weekend. Fellow defensive back Marcellus Dial hinted that he should be. But even if he is, and I said this the other day, even if Eamon Worry is back out there on the field, and I'm not saying there would be a pitch count on him or anything like that, but regardless, I think we will continue to see Jalen Kilgore out there because, number one, he's earned it. But number two, he's proven that he's capable of being thrown into the mix and being able to play defense at this level as a freshman. God Love Comic says, Ball State's wide receivers kept dropping balls that were tipped into Georgia players' hands. I saw that one hit his foot. He wasn't even looking at the ball. And the defensive lineman or a linebacker for Georgia turned around and picked it off. You also said, pretty sure Georgia hasn't seen wide receivers like ours in our first 2 games. Get Harbor some jet sweeps. Well, maybe we'll see that. Hudson goes, I don't know that we'll win, but I feel confident that we'll make it competitive and we'll fight this year. William goes, I think Braswell will get the sweeps. Just saying. We'll see. We will see. Well, boys and girls, this was supposed to be just an hour show, but you know what? I just love talking to all of you guys. I appreciate all the comments. We had plenty of people tuned in today. Again, if you've missed any of our program, if you missed the interview, which happened what feels like 2 hours ago at this point with Chris Doering of the SEC Network, you can go back and you can watch this show in its entirety on the Gamecock Central YouTube page, or if you're a podcast listener, maybe you're going to Athens. Maybe you need something for about 2 hours on that ride over to Georgia. Well, guess what? You can also find this show on the Gamecock Central podcast platform. And if you enjoy these shows, well, go back, catch all the other shows that you've missed this week. Spencer Rattler was on Monday night or Monday afternoon with Chris and Wes. Monday night, we had an interview with Nick Gargiulo. We have so much going on over at Gamecock Central. If you're not a subscriber, take advantage of it. I know you probably hear that if you haven't subscribed to one of these sites before. Maybe you have in the past. Maybe you had some bad experiences. Come on over. It's $1 to sign up for the first month, 50% off for the whole year. It's the big game week special. Can't beat it. Appreciate everyone that tuned in. And again, if you want to continue listening to some Gamecock football talk, I'm going to be hopping on shortly, actually at 4:30, with Daria Noka and Aaron Murray of the SEC Network on SEC Radio Sirius XM. That is at 4:30 to talk some Gamecock football. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Hope you guys have a good Thursday night. Coach Beamer will be over at Backstreet Grill at 6 o'clock. That will be also airing at 107.5 The Game for Carolina Calls. Potentially we could have some updates about some of these positions, including the O-line, but I'm not going to hold my breath, as well as Juice Wells. Again, have yourself a good Thursday and Friday, and if you're going to Athens, maybe I'll see you. It's my first time going to Athens. Enjoy the game, everybody.